I'm Russ Tickle, and on today's episode of American Reef, we've got another update to that Paletta Sunlit tank. So as I said, this episode here is going to be another update to that Paletta 90-gallon Sunlit tank. And if you haven't seen the episodes to date, just search the American Reef channel out on YouTube for Sunlit. Or if you have an iOS kind of device or an iPhone or an Android device, for iOS, just download podcasts and you can search for saltwater in there. That will bring up my channels, and again, search for Sunlit. Or if you have an Android-based device, just search for Pocket Casts, and then from there, again, search for saltwater, my channels will come up, and you can search for Sunlit there, and you'll see basically the episodes that brought us to this point. And to describe that in words, basically about 12 months ago, Mike set up a Sunlit tank in a sunroom with the goal of growing SPS corals under the sun from the skylights, you know, that kind of thing, right? And over these 12 months, basically he's had opportunities to kind of correct some issues. Call them disappointments, whatever you want to call them. Problems, again, it's just one of those things where each one of those episodes kind of talks about what issue he had and what he tried to do to solve it. And basically this particular episode talks about now how he has got the ultimate tank that, you know, that he kind of really likes now, as opposed to kind of like trying to solve the issues from before. And I think you'll find his solution to be relatively creative, actually. Again, if you are new to reef keeping, like I said, you can go check out my over 200-ish videos out on, you know, those other kind of video sources, or you can just go to AmericanReef.com, for example, and there are, you know, you can see the channels at the bottom of the web page there. And lastly, if you're looking for what I consider one of the best fish foods on the planet, you can check out American Reef's HPD by going to AmericanReefHPD.com. Again, rather than me talk about it, let's go see that tank.
Back to the future. Last time we looked at this tank, it was a major disappointment. I couldn't figure out why. Well, actually, I know why. There was just too much variability in the light for the SPS corals. Looking as I've measured over the past few months, some weeks it's 1,200 for 6 days, 2 weeks. Then it's 200, then it's 500, then it's 1,400. So there's just too much variability in this tank for the SPSs to really do well. Most of them had browned out, and then what didn't brown out eventually bleached out when it got real bright for 3 weeks. So I have changed the entire dynamic of this tank in that I took all the corals out of the 70, which was a soft coral tank, and put them in here. And the colors have just really picked up. The health of the corals has picked up dramatically. I've augmented the Kessels with a couple Reef Bright strips, putting out the blue, which has really brought the colors up on everything. And I've made a couple other small fundamental changes. But all in all, this tank now is a joy to take care of because it's very simple. I do one water change on it a week because you don't have to be quite as meticulous as you are with a stony coral tank. It gets fed 3 times a day. I haven't put any really crazy fish in here, but there's a nice mix of stuff from rabbitfish, fairy wrasses, damsels, cardinal fish. It's a nice display. This room's really nice to sit in and watch this tank, particularly at night. And my neighbors love this tank because the blue light extends forever, particularly when there's snow behind us. You can literally see the blue lights 2 blocks away on the snow. So I'm sure they're not real pleased with that, but those are the breaks. But I'm not a total moron. I do have the lights go off at 11 o'clock at night, so I don't really want to blind them while they're trying to sleep. So the tank has done really well now that it is established. It's almost a year old. I think it's 11 months now. I didn't really change anything other than shifting the coral mix over from predominantly SPS now to predominantly soft corals. It'll be interesting to see how they do over the summer. I'm assuming I'm probably going to have to put some shade cloth across it and bring down the light for a while. But for the most part, from September through May, I don't think there's going to be any difficulty with this tank. In addition to shifting the coral mix over from soft to stonies, I've made a couple subtle changes in the tank. In that one, I put a black background behind it, which closed it off, but it's also made the corals stand out much more in the tank. So that has made a significant difference. It's also cut down on the morning sunlight coming in through the back wall, which was where I had a ton of algae and which was where it was a real pain to get the algae out. But I've also took the caulerpa that was in the 70-gallon tank and put it in here, as there was no caulerpa for the first year, and have it under 24-hour light. And as a result, I only have to clean the glass once a week, where before I was cleaning the glass every day, every other day at most, and I mean, it was covered in thick. Right. So now there's basically virtually no algae in this tank. And that's just from adding the caulerpa into the tank.
Okay, so remember last time when we taped, you were adding a lot more flow, hoping that that would kind of solve that algae issue.
That really didn't solve the issue. All it did was make different algae grow.
Yeah, now they really liked it.
They really liked the good flow, so they were happy. But adding the caulerpa, adding it on a 24-hour cycle, and harvesting it, because I've already had to harvest it. It's only been in there roughly for 2 months. I've already had to harvest it 3 times because it grows so fast in this tank. Obviously, even though the measurements were showing low phosphate and low nitrate, there was enough to stimulate rapid growth. Right. And now I have the caulerpa competing with the microalgae in the tank, so it's much easier to maintain this tank.
And so, again, you had kind of the ecosystem miracle mud down there. Right. And so before you were using no caulerpa.
There was no caulerpa in the tank for 10 months. Right. For the past 2 months, there's now been caulerpa in the tank.
And that's what, right now, at least you've seen that difference as far as cleaning the glass and all that algae.
Right, because I changed the lights and I changed the coral mix earlier. That didn't change the amount of algae on the glass. The only thing that has changed it, well, the other thing I did do, to be honest, is I moved the tunzaes to the back rather than on the front, just to, one, make the view a lot nicer, and 2, since I'm not really worried about how the stony or how the soft corals are moving, because they basically like flow wherever, and they sort of move around within the tank, it's much easier this way to clean the front glass and everything else. Right. I didn't realize how much easier it was going to be because now I don't have to do it as often. But, and you know, as one of the rules is, the simpler things are to do, the more likely you are to do it. Right. So it was a bear taking those out, scrubbing behind them, and putting them back. Now they're in the back and there's less algae. It's much easier to clean this tank. So I do it more often. And fortunately, I haven't had to do it as often.
Now, you added that sea swirl, sea sweep in the back there.
Right, there's a sea sweep in the back.
And that didn't really help or as far as that algae as well, right?
No, the flow is not going to change the algae. It did keep the detritus moving around. And the detritus moves around and basically settles in the back because there's also a gyre on the right that blows it over. But I have, the live rock is all mounted on big walkway rocks. Right. So the dirt or the detritus tends to settle against one of the flat sides. Sure. So all I do when I do the water changes is go in with a tube, suck it all out, and pretty fast and easy, because most of it blows away from inside the rocks. I still get some. I go in with a ball base and just blast that out, and then the water motion all moves it into one spot, and then I just siphon it off.
And now, when you moved everything from the other tank, right, the tank that we originally did over to this one,
right?
When you did that, was there anything special that you did, like as far as water to like?
It was all the water. It was all the same water. I've used the same water system. I mean, it's all instant ocean. It's all same salinity.
But it was separate tanks, so you made sure the salinity was good.
Salinity was good. The temperature was good. The main difference was this gets obviously more light because it's in sunlight. And for whatever reason, I also have what I think is a better skimmer on here, which I'll show you. I have the Deltec skimmer on here, and this is basically what it has taken out in a week. Right. I mean, it looks like coffee.
Right. And the Deltec versus the other one was a Vertex?
It was a Vertex. This Deltec, for whatever reason, seems to take out more.
Right.
But until somebody sends all the gunk you take in the skimmer to a lab and say, this is what you're taking out, this is the percentage, all I can say is this tank has been cleaner and these corals have done better. And there's actually just as many fish in this tank as there were in the other tank, and this tank gets fed 3 times a day. So it's, from my point of view, this is a much easier, if you want to do a tank, this is a nice simple way to do a tank. The soft corals obviously are easier than the SPS. The only thing I do for makeup water is I use evaporated water and Kalkwasser. I'm not adding anything else to this tank. I have no trace elements, nothing else is added to this tank. And I mean, you can see what the corals look like. And compared to the other tank where things were sort of just hanging on. But one, I attribute that to much better light here, and sunlight is still the best light you're going to get, even though this is going through glass. In combination with these blue reef brights, this tank really sparkles.
Okay, so let's get back to that tank move again. In other words, when you're a new hobbyist out there and you say, hey, listen, I'm going to go from my 90 gallon or my 75 gallon to my 200 and whatever, right? What you did is you had a tank that was already set up, and you just made sure that your salinity, your temperature, what about your pH? Was the pH the same?
pH was close.
Okay. And then what about your calcium, alkalinity, and all that other sort of
My calcium and alkalinity all run over 400. Alkalinity is always over 9. There isn't that much variability where I was going to worry about it. Like downstairs, I have had fluctuations where I've had the alkalinity go up to 15. And I've lost things as a result because, as I wrote in Reef Builders, certain corals really don't like high alkalinity, like chalices hate them. Bottle brush acroporas don't hate them, hate high alkalinity. There's a lot of things that don't like high alkalinity. So now I've stabilized things 9.6, 9.8, 10 max in all my tanks. And on Saturday mornings, I test all the tanks, so they're all pretty close. And then I tweak them if I need to by adding a little bit of magnesium or a little bit of calcium chloride or whatever I need to do to bring the levels up to where I want. But for the most part, they're all pretty stable.
And, the reason I mention that is because, depending on who you talk to, what you read, and all that sort of stuff, they'll take half of the water from the original tank, add it to the new tank, and all that kind of stuff. And
from my point of view, it's the same water. It's the same water in the 300, the same water in the frag tank, same water in the 70. Now, the new tank that I'm setting up is going to be different water, and I'm not going to mix those, because one of the things that I have found is if you switch from salt to salt, then you get shocked to the corals. And I've done that in the past where I said, okay, I'm going to try this, and just switching out and doing a water change with a new type of salt has caused problems. But since this has all been with the same salt, I don't see that as being problematic.
Okay, so getting back then to there, so this has been up for about 2 months? As far
in this current incarnation, yeah, since the beginning of the year.
Okay, and so now we are at mid-March, end of March kind of thing. And have you seen more growth, less growth?
Significantly more growth, significantly more polyp extension. I see things encrusting onto the rocks where before basically things were just stable, they weren't really growing. The mushrooms are all out and open. At night you can really see them pop. I mean, it's... Yeah. I mean, I haven't put my bounce mushrooms that are downstairs in this tank yet, but that will be the next step. That's when I know this tank's good, when I move one of the bounce mushrooms up here. Then hopefully it will reproduce.
And just for the viewers, how much does that bounce mushroom cost, Mike?
Those bounce mushrooms are worth $1,500 a piece.
Oh, is that all? $1,500?
Well, the same one that sold for $6,000, I have 2 smaller versions of it.
Hold. And for those of you who haven't watched Reef Builders and there's an addiction article or something like that, there you go.
I didn't buy these. I was given these as a gift before bounce mushrooms became the mushrooms to have. So they're pretty precious little commodities, which, I still have a problem when a coral frag or a bounce mushroom's worth the price of all the equipment in your kitchen. Okay, I'm missing something here because, I don't have a wolf range or a Sub-Zero. Should I trade these two and get that? It's a close call.
That's right. So I get rid of my little my GE.
Yeah, when you're deciding, should I buy this frag or should I get a new stove? Just for me, get the stove. Don't buy the frag. I'm single for a reason because I didn't make that distinction early on in my life. Now that I have, hopefully if I find a good woman, I won't be saying, let's buy the frag instead of the stove. I'll say, yeah, honey, you want the stove, let's go crazy.
That's right. So it's to do as I say, not as I do. Okay,
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so we got a 2-month update on the tank. You basically said that you added now the macroalgae from the other tank.
Right, it's Caulerpa taxifolia. It grows like a weed. This Caulerpa is going into the other tank. Hopefully it'll take off there. And when I talk about the new tank, I'll show you the things that I'm doing there that are a little bit different than here.
Right.
But this tank, if you want to do a beginner's tank, this is a 90-gallon, quote-unquote, breeder's tank. It's lower to the ground. It's wider front to back. It gives you enough depth to where it looks like something. And you can put, from my point of view, a ton of stuff into it. I mean, there's still space in here, believe it or not. I mean, there's a few things I'm going to put in. I'm not adding any more fish. There's close to 30 fish in this tank right now, which is kind of ridiculous. But they seemingly have done well. They've all been in here at least 6 months. So I haven't really added any fish. They're pretty stable. So,
by the way, I have you on video as saying that, no, I'm not going to put that lightly stock this tank.
no, that's what I'm doing in the other tank. This tank, to me, is lightly stocked. You don't see as crazy a fish as you do in my other tanks. So, and they're also, for the most part, small fish. I don't have a really large dominant fish in here yet, although I know when the 3 rabbit fish get big, I mean, they'll get to be this big. They will not be in here when they're this big. So that will be another interesting episode of catching the rabbit fish out of this tank without getting poisoned to death.
You're going to get Zepco.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you can see them over here.
Yeah.
There's 3 of them. They came in, they were about the size of a quarter. They've quadrupled in size in a year. So hopefully that will not be the continuous trend. Like when my kids were little, I tried not to feed them so they wouldn't grow. That didn't work, so we're doing the same thing here. I'm kidding. My kids are all over 6'2", so I fed them very well. I don't want people writing and saying he didn't feed his kids.
Okay, so tank update says, yeah, you updated that. The Kalkwasser, that's been your mainstay for how many months now?
That's been since the beginning.
Okay, so since the beginning, and that's that Tunzi.
That's a Tunzi replenishment system where you just dump the Kalkwasser in the little container.
And has there been any
Makes up for
issues
evaporation.
that
You have to take it out and clean it every now and then. I basically soak it in vinegar water because that stuff does tend to
So it
clumps up over time, every 6 months. The overflow, I still haven't added a second overflow, but every Saturday morning when I'm doing my usual chores, list of things to do is make sure the siphon is going. Last time when we were, for lack of a better term, fooling around with this tank and changing some of the parameters and some of the flow and things, the siphon stopped like on cue. And usually the siphon stops when you're on vacation, when you're leaving, 5 minutes before you're trying to go to bed, the worst possible time. So now, and as a result, we could watch the water flowing up, and we've had a difficult time getting the siphon restarted. So it was, needless to say, not my finest moment of taping videos.
But it's important. People learn. I mean,
I learned how easily that is to go. So now every Saturday morning when I'm doing my measurements and my chores, one of the things I do is I basically make sure that siphon is drawing water out of it. There's a little mini pump on the back that is constantly pulling water and air out to make sure that the siphon doesn't break. As long as I do that every Saturday, I've not had any problems. Right. So, as I said, if you do things regularly, keep a listing, and make it as simple as possible. I mean, keeping that siphon going basically means sucking on the siphon to make sure there's water flowing through it and there's no gunk. Occasionally you do get a mouthful of gunk, which is not pleasurable, but it's algae. There's worse things that we've sucked into tubes on there.
And you can always shove a little needle down there or whatever, you know.
Yeah, but I like to make sure there's air going. The end result is you want to make sure it's clean. I mean, I have everything that has a potential to get sunlight and grow algae is covered out with black paper. So in that regard, I'm trying to keep stupid things from happening and that siphon from breaking. Because when it breaks, the water flows up. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've had water issues before in this house. So I have big, massive fans to dry it. But you're much better off just making sure the siphon works.
There you go. And that's where if you get the second one, that way if one breaks, you'll have a backup.
Yes, and I eventually will do that. It just has not happened yet.
That's right. Okay, so...
Because I hate taking up the extra real estate in the tank.
Lesson learned there. Again, the Tunzi Calc dispenser, you clean that every 6 months?
Every 6 months I take it out, I soak it in warm water, I put vinegar water with it and watch everything sizzle and take off all the gunk. It's clean, throw out all the old Kalkwasser, which usually is like a big ball of gunk in the bottom of it, and then it works fine. Okay,
and then skimmer-wise, you're using that Deltec, you said...
I clean that out every Saturday. I let this go for an extra 3 days. So it's really impressive how much stuff it takes out of this tank. Right. Like I said, this tank gets fed a small amount 3 times a day. The fish are all pretty fat and happy. There's even a red mandarin in here who's living off the copepods and stuff. So it's a nice, easy tank to maintain. So if you don't want to go nuts with an SPS tank, which, you know, everybody, that's the tank. To me right now, this is an enjoyable tank. A lot of people like the motion. A lot of people like to watch the polyps moving.
That's me.
This is the tank to do it. I mean, the affiliates are all doing well now. I mean, everything is pretty much settled in. It's going to be interesting to see how much summer affects this tank again. Because now that it's a soft coral tank versus an SPS tank, I have had friends that have soft coral tanks under sunlight, and basically the corals grow up to the top of the water. So the next thing may be I may have to drop the rock levels down and let the corals grow even bigger. So that will also not be a fun time, but it's not particularly difficult because everything is sort of drilled and mounted through. All I got to do is lift it off, take one rock out, drop it down, and it'll be 6 inches lower.
And that'll be a good update for the next segment then, right?
Yes.
So closing remarks as far as this tank, right? Again, last time we talked, a little bit fairly disappointed. Now I'm getting the, whoa, I'm not so disappointed now, right?
I've actually made it simpler. I do one water change a month in this tank, roughly 10 gallons. So I do 10%. It's roughly a 90-gallon tank and a 40-gallon sump. Just feed the tank, Kalkvasser to make up for evaporation, good flow, good lights.
Right.
I mean, if you want to do a simple tank, and you don't want to spend a gazillion dollars. I mean, soft corals are still relatively inexpensive. You don't have to start off with big colonies because they grow just as fast as SPS. I mean, you can leave some space and let things grow in. And a lot of people, particularly people that are just getting into the hobby or that aren't into the hobby, like this kind of tank because the colors now, it's not all brown soft corals like it used to be. There's lots of greens, there's lots of colors.
Reds, purples,
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of color. I mean, obviously it's not as brilliantly colored as an SPS tank. But in exchange for that, you get more motion within the corals. The corals are easier to maintain. They're less expensive. So this may be the ticket for someone that doesn't want to go completely nuts into the hobby.
So the question I have is, will you ever be trying SPS in an open sunlit world again? Is that still kind of a...
I may stick a couple frags in here just to see, but I'm not going to devote myself to this being an SPS tank. I'm really happy with this tank. All my friends and relatives that come over and sit in this room enjoy this tank. None of them are into the hobby. So from my point of view, this has accomplished what it wants. It fits into the room nicely. It looks very nice. The blue light annoys the neighbors who don't talk to me. So,
so it's a win all the way across the board.
No, I'm just teasing my neighbors. My neighbors are all very nice, but I'm sure this blue light annoys them. They just are too nice to say anything. So it's a nice looking tank from my point of view. I mean, I hadn't done a serious soft coral tank for a while. I mean, the tank in there was a soft coral tank, but it wasn't, from my point of view, serious in that I wasn't adding anything. It was just hanging on because I knew I was going to replace it. Now that I have this in its stead, I'm looking for odd soft corals to put in here. Zoes go in here and do very well. There's clams in here. The Aphilias are in here. All the leathers and sinularias. This weird star polyp. I mean, unfortunately, that's a star polyp that hasn't gone berserk like a lot of star polyps do and cover the tank. So I've liked that. There's a xenia in the back that also hasn't covered the tank. So I'm looking for things that are colorful, move in the water flow, but don't totally dominate the tank. I don't want this to be a one species tank.
Yeah, exactly. Good deal. So thanks for the time on this update, and we'll come back to this one probably, we'll say about 6 months. Something like that.
Sounds good.